good morning, good afternoon, and of course a very good evening to wherever in the world you may be. Now in today's video I'm going to discuss something that you might be well to assume would be close to my heart, but no, you couldn't be any more further from the truth. As the title would suggest, as we go through this video, it'll become quite clear as to why. Now our darling and supposedly beloved Queen is, more often than not, a regular face within our newspapers and our televisions. All manner of different stories are brought to us about little Liz and the rest of the brainy bunch. As of a more recent story, the poor little poodle topper has, after 175 years of unbroken tradition, had to even wake up to her undoubtedly busy day ahead without the sound of bagpipes playing beneath her home in Balmoral Castle. Now, putting aside why anyone would want to be woken up by bagpipes, unless of course you were deaf, blind and headless might help. I have to say, I was so utterly shocked and left feeling so terribly sad for the Queen that I couldn't help myself but feel that in an effort to, well, cheer her up, I would make this video all about her and her darling family. So today, in this video, I want to look at some hidden truths that surround the mysterious royal family, and in-depthly look at some of their involvement with matters. Undoubtedly one of the most famous cases linked to the royal family is that of Jack the Ripper. Yes, the conspiracy surrounding it anyway. Well, I say conspiracy. More of a long overdue cover-up is more how I see it. But for now we'll pretend it's just a theory. Now, Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria and great-uncle to our Queen Liz, has been widely accused of being Jack the Ripper. The Duke of Clarence was found in medical letters to be taking treatment for gonorrhea, and due to his promiscuous lifestyle, he was involved in the Cleveland Street scandal, which was covered up in England but largely exploited his name in the Welsh and American press. In 1888, the scandal involved a gay brothel being swept by the police, and the workers handed over the high-profile names who visited, including that of Albert Victor. Not much changes, really, does it? Not naming any places. His STDs was rumoured to send him mad and want to kill prostitutes as a revenge plot. While that may be exaggerated a bit, he is still linked in many ways, such as his royal carriage being spotted around some of the murder scenes and descriptions fitting his build and age and so on. So yes, it's quite strange, as much as it is complicated. Now, sticking with the Ripper, there is evidence that also debunks the theory that he was Jack the Ripper, such as accounts that he was travelling abroad at the time of the murders. However, one of the strangest links to the Ripper case is the files themselves. Now, in 1888, 4 ledgers were compiled of all the evidence given at the time. These files have been heavily protected ever since. In 2011 and 2014, there have been legal battles to get these files released. Senior detectives of Scotland Yard gave evidence behind a screen as to why the files could not be released. 2 main reasons prevailed, it would seem. The first one being that if the files are released, it will compromise any new evidence forwarded by modern informants. Well, for the ledgers to be this heavily guarded, surely they have enough evidence to narrow down who it is without need of modern informants, you might think. The second reason being that harm could come to the descendants of the people who gave evidence at the time. Well, I highly doubt they're around for a start, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But this could be looked at from 2 points of view generally. The view of the witness, their relatives, alive today, could be traced and harmed. Well, although this could only be done by higher powers who have the technology to do this, or keeping on the point of the royals, as our Queen Elizabeth is a direct relative of Prince Albert, or another royal who may be involved, people may be out to get members of the royal family, it more sounds to me, due to the new evidence being released. However, I'm sure they would protect it if that were the case anyway, as it appears they are doing. The legal battle had cost the taxpayer thousands of pounds, and there is the Freedom of Information Act to release police documentation 100 years after the trial date unless it involves direct family members. The police do not usually fight to keep evidence from public view unless it would be an obvious scandal to a major public society, like the royals, funnily enough. Anyway, I'm sure we'll find out in another 100 years or so. Another scandal was the Wallis Simpson scandal. Now, in 1936, King Edward VIII abdicated the throne as he struggled to fulfill his duties as king without the love of the woman he was calling his mistress. And Wallis Simpson was an American socialite who was twice divorced. The Church of England and the Prime Minister forbade the marriage of the British king and the American due to tensions with Germany before World War II, as it was rumoured Hitler could gain control of England through collapsing the current monarchy and reinstating the German House of Hanover. The Church of England also didn't grant blessing on the marriage, as they did not allow divorce or the previously divorced to remarry, despite the Church of England starting up from Henry VIII wanting to divorce his first wife.
Cheeky bastard. The Pope's just blocked me.
Doesn't this just show how the royals can manipulate the rules to suit themselves whenever, however? Classic example of that, if nothing else. There have been numerous scandals throughout the history of various kings and queens. I mean, these include King John, who was forced by barons to sign the Magna Carta to control taxes which paid for the king's luxury lifestyle. So no real change there also. Richard III, who apparently murdered his two nephews in the Tower of London. Henry VIII, who started his own religion just to divorce his first wife.
Yes, we're connected!
Yeah. As just mentioned, and then remarrying 6 times. And William II, Edward II, and James I, who were all known to be promoting pretty young men to their courts ahead of older experienced political officials. Some even documented to be laying in the same chambers as the king. Now, the current royal family, known as the House of Windsor, have been under more speculation than any other royal family due to the media celebritizing the family and the internet tracking thousands of pieces of information linking the royals to all sorts of endeavours. That and the Rothschild blackmailing the elite's secrets for their own gains. But we can talk more about that another time. Now let's talk about inbreeding. Our current queen, Elizabeth, and her husband, Prince Phil, are in fact second cousins. Now, I know this isn't new news. Most people are aware of this. They are both great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria. Prince Philip is great-grandson to Queen Victoria's second daughter, Princess Alice, whilst Elizabeth is great-granddaughter of Victoria's eldest son, Prince Edward, who was later king. From thousands of years ago, it's been believed that the royals have divine blood and must keep that line pure by breeding with each other. Yes, well, nothing quite says posh like sticking it in your own sister or so on, does it? Anyway, with inbreeding, there is also a number of genetic diseases that can occur. King George III was constantly institutionalized because of his madness.
You're completely insane!
Queen Victoria was a haemophiliac. It's also been speculated that Prince Philip's own mum was sectioned. There is also a somewhat old theory now that the royals are in fact blood-drinking cannibals. This was so thought as one of their supposed interbred conditions involved scarred skin and bad, almost fang-like teeth, resulting in some of the original ideas for vampires, the likes of Dracula and so on. It was thought this condition was cured by eating human flesh and drinking human blood. However, I'm sure finding a palace menu with human steak would be quite a challenge. Let us not forget that Prince Charles also mentioned in an interview that he is a very distant relative, and I stress very distant relative, of Vlad Tepes, known as Vlad the Impaler, one of the more direct and associated inspirations for the blood-sucking Dracula we all know. So yes, although that's fact, royals running around with pointy teeth and fingers, it's debatable. Then again, you only have to look at them. The Queen Mother also had 2 of her nieces, Nerissa and Catherine, locked away for being mentally handicapped, and was basically forgotten about as the royal family never went to visit them. The Berks Peerage, who's who of the royals, listed the cousins as officially dead in 1940 and 1961. Nerissa did die sometime after 1990, and despite the Queen's wealth, she was buried with a 6-inch plastic tag with her asylum number and her surname, Bowes-Leon. Catherine is still thought to be alive, and there is rare footage of her found around the internet. Another taboo link to the royals is their involvement with the Nazis pre- and post-World War II. King George V changed the royal surname from Saxe-Coburg to Gotha to the British, sounding Windsor. It was essentially a rebranding to improve the PR of the royal family against the German prejudices rife throughout England in World War I and later in World War II. Now, Edward VIII of England was known to be an anti-Semitic person. In June 1940, he was reported by a Spanish diplomat that he was arguing that the Nazis should bomb England to end World War II. The Spanish passed this on to the Germans, and, no surprise, on 10th of July 1940, England was first bombed by the Nazis. Edward was also at the epicentre of a German plot to overthrow the popular Winston Churchill by persuading Edward that his successor, King Brother George, was part of a plan to assassinate Edward, so he will never be able to be king again. The plan known as Operation Will was discovered by British intelligence and ensured it never happened, as far as we know. Another conspiracy plot, or more so a full-on fact in my opinion, was that Edward VIII met with Hitler, Himmler, and other high Nazi officials to create an alliance with them, so if the Nazis won the war, Edward would be reinstated as king. If the Allies won, then George stayed as king. This ensured the royal family kept their power no matter who won. Other Nazism links to another grandson of Queen Victoria, Karl Edward. He was promoted to Duke of Coburg in Germany and moved back to his family's homeland at Queen Victoria's request. Now, in the outbreak of World War II, he became a great ally to Hitler, supplying soldiers against England where he was brought up on taxpayers' money. It is believed that sending Prince Karl over to Germany was part of a bigger plan to crush the powers of Europe and entice the royals to take over, since Karl was cousins with royals in Norway, Germany, Russia, Romania, Sweden, Spain, and the Netherlands. This many relations ensured he had constant and close contact with the other royals and the feedback to the powers in England. As Hitler's defeat drew close, one of his last telegrams from his bunker was to ensure Charlie's safe escape from Germany. However, he was caught and was due to be imprisoned for war crimes against humanity. However, he was not tried in court. Instead, he was fined and sent to live in exile under a different name. Funny that. It was as though high royal power protected him, one might say. And just to add a further point, our Prince Phil grew up in Nazi Germany and is seen pictured with members of the SS in marches before the war. He is told how in school they were taught into giving the Nazi salute and was given a propaganda education. 2 of his sisters also married high-ranking Nazi officials. Oh, why change the habit of a lifetime? And let's not forget his grandson, Prince Harry's leaked photographs of him wearing the swastika armband at a party. It's not just a coincidence, and it isn't. As we've seen, these people of power, or under power's control, shall we say, they do like to do little things to rub it in our faces. You all know what I mean. Yes, because us the small people and them the high and mighty who can, of course, get away with literally anything. And yes, it would seem that they do, even murder.
Bloody damn butchering Nazi pig.
Now, there is said to be a lot of evidence of the Nazi connections in the royal family's personal archives in the Round Tower at Windsor Castle. When there were inquiries into the royal finances and history, they had to release any information for public interest. Interestingly enough, Parliament voted for a change in the Freedom of Information Act. This protected the royal family from having to release any documentation that scrutinizes them, as it is said to damage national security by causing an anti-royalist demeanor, if you can believe such a bloody thing.
Yes, sir. You're a fucking liar.
One interesting release was the 1933 footage of King Edward VIII and the Queen Mother teaching Princess Elizabeth how to perform the Nazi salute. This was released at an exhibition and received mixed emotions, as King Ed was a Nazi sympathizer, and he wasn't shy about it either. But again, the outcry always seems to be far little than far less, much to my confusion, I must admit. But that's people for you. Now, speaking of people, little do they know that our Queen Liz is exempt from paying tax on all income, unlike the labours of the country. But bless her, she volunteers to make her one of the people. So, to counterbalance this, our innocent pensioner, in 2017 I believe, was caught for tax avoidance. Comes as no surprise, does it, as more often than not the people who, of course, have money don't have to pay for much of anything. Even more interesting, the Freedom of Information Act also conceals how much she actually contributes, so there is no proof that she even does pay any tax of any sort whatsoever. So yes, newspapers and investigations and that brought about reported 10 million in offshore tax havens in the Cayman Islands and the Bermuda. The Duchy of Lancaster, which is the Queen's private fund, had dodged 15 million in tax on the duchy, worth £520. This was attempted to be covered up and make the Queen look as innocent as possible by blaming her financial advisors. However, the Queen has to give the okay to where her money goes, so of course she was aware. Just talking shit, basically. I mean, just think about it. 160 billion was lost in the UK due to tax avoidance and evasion, and the Queen has contributed towards this. That's enough money to run, say, the NHS for a year. But something such as the NHS is of no interest to these money-hungry, power-mad murderers. Also, with the finances of the royal, she demanded that the taxpayer should foot the bill for damages caused to Windsor Castle, despite it being a private residence, not a publicly owned one. Yes, Windsor Castle is an official residence of the Queen, and is where she spends much of her time. Parliament received the bill of requests from the Queen to pay for the cost. This was denied by Parliament, partly due to public influence, for a change. So instead of admitting defeat, she decided to open Buckingham Palace for the first time to the public for a tour around a portion of the grounds. This was agreed only on advice from the Queen's senior advisors. This generated 70% of the income for the repair bill, and the dear Queen supposedly put a mere 2 million of her own pocket change towards the 35 million in damages. Oh, bless her. I would just like to add a further point to congratulate the public who complained about taxpayers' money going towards the cost, but then went to pay to visit the palace anyway. Well done. Good for you. To add to this, the Queen also receives 97 million in taxpayers' money, so despite her apparently paying tax, doesn't that mean she's paying for herself? Doesn't take much to work out, does it? She also invested a percentage of investments in UK Rent to buy company Brighthouse, who was heavily fined in the same year for charging customers too high interest on items they rented. And what have we learned from this? Don't let the Queen manage your money, for one thing. Now, in addition to this 97 million from the taxpayer, the Queen is also to have millions invested in private funds. Officially, the Queen is worth 325 million, I believe it was. A lot poorer than the likes of Bill Gates, supposedly. But when you consider the amount of land and assets that is just belonging to the monarchy, i.e. the Queen, including 89% of Crown land in Canada, which she receives a fund from, and she has land value in England over 1 billion, which she receives revenue from every year. She also owns multiple palaces worth over 1 trillion, and let's not forget the solid gold carriage that she travels in, the expensive art that she collects, the Rolls Royces she's driven in. Remember as well, she is the official owner of the crown jewels, amongst other expensive jewels and jewellery and God only knows what, which includes one cut from the largest diamond ever found. The diamond, known as Koh-i-Noor, was presented to Queen Victoria as a gift, supposedly by the Empress of India, and remains in the hands of the monarch till today. I wonder if she knows exactly what suffering comes once again from the poor people to obtain such supposedly luxury items. And I stress the word supposed luxury items, as diamonds are in fact actually quite worthless, regardless of size, shape, colour. Believe me, look into that yourself, but I intend to do a video about it one day. Now let's just take a minute as well to note that the Prince of Wales, our Charles, also has some exemptions above the law. He dodges £50,000 fines in planning permission, as he can build on public ground wherever he wants without the need for permission from the council like ordinary contractors would need. He gets free advice from government lawyers and doesn't have to pay any corporation tax or capital gains tax on any of his private business ventures. Also, legally, he cannot be summoned to any court by demand if it endangers his private interest and can deter any law, as he is under the jurisdiction of the Duchy of Cornwall, a completely separate legal state to Her Majesty's courts. Yes, another little trick with Cheeky Charlie is the amount of direct taxpayer money he gets from paying servants' wages, personal expenses. Bloody hell, he even has a servant to lay out his left and right socks in the morning, in the exact positions, I might add. Reports from Clive Goodman, royal correspondent to the Phone Hackers Union, News of the World, sorry, even stated that Prince Charles likes soft-boiled eggs and whiskey when he comes back from hunting, because it's so tiresome, isn't it? The servants don't know exactly when he's coming back, so they start boiling half an hour before he's due, and every time he's not home, they are thrown into the bin until he's back. So if he runs half an hour late, that can be over 100 eggs a day wasted, or more even. Yet again, this is taxpayers' money being spent. It might not sound like much, but think about it. When there are people starving to death the world over, pensioners, veterans, and the NHS gets less every year, yet they are just wasting food willingly to show off their wealth. And just to add more scope on the situation, the Royals receive $32 million for personal expenses, yet the actual figure dug up by researchers was over $202 million. Bit of a difference. Anyway, let's look at what the royals actually do. Now today, the British royal family is perhaps the most famous royal family throughout the world due to them marketing their family as being one of the people who deal with life like every other modern person. Yes, of course they do. Many modern people think of them as the original Kardashians, but that's modern people for you. The Queen herself doesn't have much political power, and most of her public responsibilities are purely traditional and ceremonial. Take, for instance, when a new law is passed by Parliament and the Prime Minister, the Queen has to sign the law to say it's implemented in her land, but this is just a formality. If the Queen refuses, the law can still be passed. And when a new Prime Minister is elected, even though the public votes for who they want by majority of seats, the winner of the most votes has to be instated into office by the Queen. However, if the Queen disapproves, she can pick a person over the public. But if she does, then I think people will want to revolt, as their vote was counted for nothing. A bit like Brexit, you might say. But we won't go into that, because I don't want to massacre an entire village. Moving on, the Queen holds many titles, including being Queen to over 30 countries and territories, and being head of state for the Commonwealth, over 10 unofficial titles in countries and American states outside the Commonwealth. She is also Commander-in-Chief for the UK's and Canada's armed forces. Amongst others, she is even the highest level club scout in Japan, of all things. So, with all these titles and assumed responsibilities, if you want to call them that, the question still stands, regardless, what does she actually bloody do? Well, she meets with the Prime Minister every week to discuss current affairs, basically to have a little chin wag. These meetings are never recorded or discussed with anyone else, of course. Her titles actually mean very little, since she is the commander of the armed forces. In theory, she has the military at her hand. However, in practice, this is not the case, as the army is managed by the defence minister in Parliament, and it's the Prime Minister who grants the use of armed weapons, not the Queen. The Queen is basically the face of England. She does state visits around the world to help increase the relations and security of the UK. It does play an important part, as these relations help maintain the UK as a powerful country. However, this does essentially mean the Queen goes on holiday in her private jet, at the taxpayer's expense yet again, and she's one of the few people in the world who doesn't have to show a passport when travelling. Even President Trump has to have a diplomatic passport. A lot of these titles also derive from the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth spans all 6 continents and takes up 20% of the world's land surface area. Just in brief, the Commonwealth is a intergovernmental organisation that are mostly former territories of the British Empire. The British Empire was formed due to England falling behind in colonising overseas, which was the popular thing for other European countries to do and compete in trade. Instead, England tried to colonise America and destroy Spanish ports to reduce competition. This angered the Spanish to the point of war, as expected. Luckily, you could say, the Armada was defeated by Queen Elizabeth's First Navy. Queen Elizabeth sent out numerous privateers to start finding land to add to the British sovereignty. The tensions between England and countries like Spain, France, Netherlands, and Germany were high as England kept taking over trade route for their own needs. The tensions dropped slightly when William of Orange became King of England, easing tensions with the Dutch at least. However, the American colonies complained about taxes going to England, and after the American Revolution became their own country. This led to James Cook being sent by the Crown to claim Australia. At its peak, the Empire owned Canada, India, Australia, and various colonies around Africa and South America. This helped fund both world wars financially. The decline of the empire came after the war as more colonies became separate countries, the last major one being Hong Kong in, I believe it was 1997. Now, after the decline of the empire, Britain's royal family has become more of a celebrity commodity, as is most things these days, you could say. The weddings, the lives, and even funerals being broadcast and published in the media like most other attention-seeking nobodies of today. The Kardashians, as mentioned earlier, the Beckhams, the Windsors, it all just has the same ring to it, doesn't it? Bloody stupid and bloody pointless, in my opinion. Well, naturally, the weddings of William and Kate and Harry and Meghan were just PR stunts to show off the power and wealth of the family. Both weddings was broadcast to all countries in the Commonwealth, America and other countries who paid. They also make money off all the merchandise such as copy wedding dresses and collectible china plates with their darling little faces on. The PR of the family is also subliminally publicized through recent films such as The King's Speech, as an example, where we are made to sympathize with Elizabeth's dad being king with a speech impediment. The Kingsmen, who are a group of spies whose pledges are allegiance to the monarch and the Queen, starring the superbly well-glued together, I must say, Helen Mirren, showing the Queen's upset for the loss of Princess Diana despite her not even going to the funeral and making such comments upon hearing of her death, of that being, "Oh, someone must have greased the brakes." Yes, do you think they would get such sympathizing actors such as the romancing Hugh Grant to play Stalin, or the gentle Colin Firth to play King Jong-un? I think not. Don't get drawn into this rubbish if you can help yourself. It's basically just propaganda bollocks.